am Anna Seawold, and this is Authentic Parenting, a podcast about personal development in the context of parenting, where I explore how you can find more calm, connection, and joy in parenting through the process of self-discovery and inner growth with a trauma-informed lens. I'm a parent educator, and my mission is to help children by helping parents. The motto of this podcast is raising our children, growing ourselves. Today, a really thought-provoking and important conversation with world-class pediatric surgeon, social scientist, and best-selling author of 30 Million Words, Dr. Dana Suskind. She has a new book out. It's called Parent Nation, and it's all about why early childhood years matter and how society can and should help families meet the developmental needs of their children by providing more robust support for parents during the most critical years for building a bright future. Weaving together the latest science on the developing brain with heartbreaking and relatable stories of families from all walks of life, Dr. Suskind shows that the status quo, scores of parents convinced they should be able to shoulder the enormous responsibility of early childhood care and education on their own, is not only unsustainable, but deeply detrimental to the well-being of children, families, and society. She argues that investing in early years has a huge return on investment and offers a blueprint for a path forward. She gives examples of policies and programs in the United States and in other countries that seek to provide the necessary support and the significant benefits that some of these programs bring. After reading her book, I had so many conversations with the people in my life about the many topics in the book. Such important points. I feel strongly about the things that she talks about in the book, and I really felt honored to have had her on the show. Here is her formal bio. Dr. Dana Suskind is a professor of surgery, pediatrics, and public policy at the University of Chicago and co-director of the TMW Center for Early Learning and Public Health. An internationally recognized thought leader, Dr. Suskind has dedicated her research and clinical life to optimizing foundational brain development and preventing early cognitive disparities and their lifelong impact. In 2013, Dana and her team led the first ever Bridging the 30 Million Word Gap, convening at the request of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. She is the author of 30 Million Words, Building a Child's Brain, and of the New York Times bestselling book, Parent Nation, Unlocking Every Child's Potential, Fulfilling Society's Promise, which empowers parents to use developmental neuroscience to build a society that works for families, not against them. Her new book, Parent Nation, is an outstanding book written with empathy and intellect, sharing deep and powerful stories and backed by thorough and important research. I mentioned before that I read a lot for pleasure, but mostly for the podcast and because of the podcast. And at the end of each year, I try to make a top 10 best books list, parenting books and personal development books. And this year, I just counted the other day, I have read so far 24 books. And I have already have my favorites, and Parent Nation is one of them. If you're curious, here are the other top 5 books that I read so far, and I highly recommend. Number 1 has to be Stolen Focus by brilliant Johann. Number 2 is The AfterGrief by Edeleman. Number 3 is The Anatomy of Anxiety by Vora. Number 4 is Strange Situation by Bethany Saltman. And number 5 is Brain Body Parenting by Mona Delahooke. Of course, the year is not over yet, so I'm keeping my options open. I read many fantastic books, but the 6 that I mentioned today are my top picks for the year so far. And of course, I have interviewed all the authors on the podcast. I will have a link in the show notes for their respective episodes. You may wonder what's my criteria for choosing books. I'll tell you, there are several. And I think number 1 has to be the idea of the book, has to be fresh and interesting enough for me to explore. I have to learn something from the book. It has to expand my mind. It has to have compelling storytelling. I always love that aspect of great books. It has to have good research, solid good research, originality. It has to be written beautifully, well written with intellect and empathy. And I think that's what I'm looking for in a book. It has to be different. It has to be unique. It has to be fresh. The author's voice is very important for me too. So that's why I selected the above books. If you are a foreign listener, I would really love to hear how things are where you live. So please get in touch after you listen to this episode and share your experience. Raising children shouldn't be a lonely endeavor, but a collective responsibility. Please enjoy my conversation with Dana Suskind. Dr. Dana Suskind, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
I honestly didn't know what to expect from this book. It was very intriguing, the title, Parent Nation, and I saw some stuff on Instagram. I'm like, this is really like very interesting. And I was not wrong. The book is so well written and your voice is so powerful, and clearly it shows how you have thought about the topics so much. And clearly you were able to communicate that on a piece of paper. And it's so grounded in research and science and so brilliant. So I am so moved and touched by your optimism, by your passion. And there's so much in this book, honestly. But of course, I narrowed down to a few topics that I want to talk about. And like I underlined so much, and I hate to ruin the book like that, but there are just so many wonderful sentences.
I have to tell you, you're making my heart sing. Not so much that you're saying it about our writing, but that it resonated in the way that I hoped it would resonate.
No, the writing is powerful too. I mean, I read a lot of books for the podcast and not only. And I think I'm going to put this one, and every year I choose top 10 of the year. Not that I'm some big celebrity or anything, but my community still appreciate. I think this is going to be in the top 10 of this year so far, and I've read a lot.
Thank you so much. And I have a wonderful co-author, Lydia Denworth. So it's really a labor of love together. So thank you.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. So let's talk about this as we already are getting excited. You wrote in the book, you said, when I wrote my first book, I thought that just knowing and understanding and having others know and understand the powerful brain science would be enough to bring about meaningful change. I was wrong. I really want to start there. And I have to be honest, I haven't read your first book, so I have no clue what it's about, but from your second book, I gained some idea. So how were you wrong? Tell us.
Yeah. So, just I think to help contextualize it, my first book, 30 Million Words, Building a Child's Brain, really looked at an individual level, what the neuroscience says that all children need to thrive for healthy brain development. And at the end of the day, it's about nurturing talk and interaction and protection from toxic stress. And really, the first book explored the science that undergirds healthy brain development at the individual level. And in some ways, not in some ways, I really wrote the first book, number one, because, I'm a surgeon. And I always said, like, if a surgeon could be so inspired by the brain science to step out of the operating room, certainly the country, the world would be as well. So I wrote it with the idea that if we understood how powerful parents and caregivers were and are, that maybe sort of societal supports and structures could then be provided, which of course didn't happen. So I guess I'm not answering your question, but in some ways I thought that would be enough for parents to understand how powerful they were and how society needs to better support them. What happened was the first book was sort of consumed as a how-to, right? What can I do as a parent to build my child's brain, which is great. I want parents to know how powerful they are. But in some ways, I felt like, did I contribute to this idea that parents, it's all on their shoulders? It's a go it alone phenomenon. And especially because it didn't seem to push forward the societal shifts that I had hoped. So Parent Nation is my attempt to say, okay, we know parents are powerful. We know caregivers build children's brains, but now society needs to understand that same science and support them better. So
true. And especially during this COVID-19 pandemic, COVID-19 put the spotlight on the issues that they were there. And now your book is so timely and relevant. And I think it's going to spark a movement, and I hope it will. And we could see some change, that it's not only the parents, right? We are like the richest, wealthiest country in the world. And we claim that we have family values as a society. But as you write, and as we know, it seems like the United States doesn't even care, put families first, right? And I am Armenian. I lived in 4 countries before I came to the United States. I became a parent in the United States, and I went back to my country as a parent, and I observed how parenting is done. And I felt how miserable I was here in the United States and how envious I was what I could have had if I were to become a parent there. And I work with parents, and you're right. You know, when I first became a parent, I knew child psychology. I had all this education and work experience. But what I felt was I was lonely, isolated, no support, no systemic support, as you write. And while I created my own support network, a mommy group, I was very industrious and resourceful. Yeah. I took care of my own needs, but it was very private. It was limited. And it was just only me, right? I could do so much on my own. And so your book raises such important subjects that it's just so valuable and dear to my heart.
Yeah, well, no, exactly. I mean, what you did is what so many parents across the country do, right? We've internalized this idea that parenting is a go it alone phenomenon. And when things don't go right, it's all on you. And, you just try to make it work. And when it doesn't go right, you feel like a failure rather than sort of saying, why isn't, society supporting me better? I mean, we always we always say in the Parent Nation team, parents are great at trying to build support systems. And for those that are lucky enough to have the right support systems, they're great. I mean, I have benefited from that tremendously, but we need supportive systems too. Support systems and supportive systems, because as you mentioned, despite, being the country with the largest GDP around the world, we spend the least on children and families, the least. And we have convinced, because of this American individualism, that it's all on you. And it wasn't just you who's miserable. I think there's so many, there's actually research showing, we love our children, we'll do anything for them. But actually parents in this country are the least happy compared to non-parents than any other developed nation. And it's because of the lack of supports.
Yes, true. The happiness gap. We covered this on the podcast with another guest, that there was a comparison between parents and non-parents, right? And of course, non-parents are always happier than parents because it's hard to be a parent. However, United States was in the bottom of that list. And it's like we're always in the bottom of all sorts of lists in comparison to other countries. But I think what you said about we spent $500 per year per toddler, compared to Norway, Finland, or other countries who spent $29,000, $18,000. This is like incredible.
The average that includes places, that are much less than us. I mean, like everybody's going to say, oh, Scandinavian countries, 28,000, 29,000, that's a different realm. But the average is 14,000, right? $14,500 for the richest country in the world is like,
yeah. Where are our values and where are our priorities? Yeah, that's what I want to ask that question. And of course, most of the attention goes to K to 12, right? All the other, levels of childhood. But I cannot believe how early childhood is almost not even talked about. It's dismissed. I speak at early childhood education conferences, and I do talk about how the educators, early childhood educators, I say this and they clap every time I say this sentence. I say, you guys, are raising, are responsible for the future. You're raising the future adults and you're shaping the children's brains. And, this is a privilege and responsibility, and you should get paid more compared to college professors. Like what's going on here, right? And that's like on a systemic level. One more thing, I am so passionate about this topic too.
We're meant to talk for sure.
And my neighbor, I have a few neighbors who have young children, and here is their thinking. They're educated people that they are trying to find the cheapest nanny, the cheapest babysitter, the cheapest camp. And I asked one of them just the other day, I said, listen, why do you don't want to pay more? Because this is a service that you need, and they're taking care of your children. Why do you want to skimp on this and pay $500 for a pair of sneakers, for example? Where are our values? Parents think that way too, unfortunately.
Well, look, I want to be clear that the system, the way that it's set, there's no winners, right? Because in some ways, parents, they're breaking under the cost for childcare, right? I mean, people are paying, if you're in the top 1%, fine. But most people, they're paying the equivalent of a second mortgage or college tuition because because there's no federal or state allowance towards this. Parents' backs are breaking, and childcare providers are being paid less than dog walkers. It's, this system doesn't feel like the fix is, it's great if they can pay more, and you should pay more if you can, for sure. But really the right fix is that, like in other countries, we support early childcare systems as an infrastructure. As you know, so many women have left the workforce. And I can even tell you, there was Talia in the book, here she's a PhD. She couldn't afford childcare. She's a brilliant woman who should be doing research, had to leave the workforce because you can't pay more than you're making, right? So you're right in telling these families they should pay more, but at the same time, many families can't pay more,
True. Yeah. No, it's a multi-layered problem, unfortunately. And it's very sad to, the first part of your book was wow, it's, you just put it out there. It's very sad reminders of our issues and our problems. But there was a wonderful quote by John Bowlby in the book that I want to read. If a community values its children, it must cherish their parents.
Exactly. Definitely
yes.
At the time, right?
Definitely. We need to cherish. But it seems like when you mentioned Finland, it seems like it wasn't the case for them from the very beginning that they reached that level, right? It's not like they had this kind of support for parents and childcare from the beginning of time.
You're talking about Finland,
or maybe other countries. I don't know.
Finland is a perfect example. I think that what people often think in this country, not only do they not realize what outliers we are in terms of the lack of support, but you get this feeling like it's been this way. It always will be this way. It will never change, right? And the beauty of the Finnish case is that they were, at the bottom of the pack educationally for so long, and they have totally transformed their system. And, especially in the early years, really investing, both in educare and supporting parents, and they have transform the outcomes of their children. And in that same way, I think it's a bright spot. We need bright spots, right? And I think it really is a bright spot to hopefully getting us to think, more ambitiously and, about what we can do.
So I think in 1971, I was very interested to read this since, I didn't grow up in this country, the Comprehensive Child Development Act. Can you talk about that and what happened?
Yeah, no, it's, I always like to say it's sort of like, did you ever see the movie Sliding Doors?
No, I don't think so.
Gwyneth Paltrow. Oh, it's my husband's
favorite. Maybe I've seen, yes.
Yeah. It's where Gwyneth Paltrow can either, if she makes it onto the subway, she gets home early enough to find her philandering husband, or if she doesn't, what happens? So it's basically, how life can be so different depending on if you go left or go right. And I like to think about the Comprehensive Child Development Act as one of those sliding door moments. If it would have occurred, not only would we not be taught, well, maybe we'd be talking, but I wouldn't have had to write this book. It was a universal comprehensive child care bill that, by a sliding scale, really allowed all families to benefit from this high quality childcare. Even families who decided would want to be stay at home, there were supports for them. It was an incredible bill that would have resulted in a country with high quality universal childcare. It had huge bipartisan support. I mean, we always think today, there's, so much polarization. It was supported by both sides of the aisle, and it was so close to being passed. In fact, it was on Nixon's desk, and only in the 11th hour did he veto it. And the reason he vetoed it was that Pat Buchanan had said, look, they're going to call you a communist because I guess they had high quality childcare in Russia at that time. And even though Nixon had actually run on a childcare and healthcare platform, he vetoed it. He almost, as somebody quoted, he drove a stake through the heart of early childcare. And it is the reason that today we have this sort of patchwork of childcare that doesn't support anyone, that is just not supporting children, families, or childcare providers. But yeah, we were very, very close to having a very different country, which is very, very sad.
Yeah, that is very sad. So it came very close, but it had a very promising, future, but it died very quickly, this idea, unfortunately. I mean, I was raised in the Soviet Union, and childcare, like I remember preschool, kindergarten, all those wonderful years, and my whole family, my parents were teachers. I mean, I come from this teacher's background, legacy. It's pretty fascinating, the differences, what they value there and what they value here. It's quite shocking.
No, it is so interesting. Well, I mean, I know that I digress a little bit, but I think it's so, I talk about I think it's chapter 2, the streetlight effect, right? And, how often in this country we focus on K-12 as the great equalizer. By free and universal public education, we're going to let children have, access to the American dream. And how when, it didn't get the results that we wanted, around Sputnik here, they had Russia had gotten into space first. That was single-handedly why, I guess, science education and people doubled down on education. But I made the point that here they were sort of following Russia's lead for that, but then they didn't do the childcare part. Maybe if they had done the childcare part, earlier, we'd be in a different scenario. But
I mean, is it lack of knowledge? Is it lack of understanding? Is it lack of, it's not, right? That the science is there about brain development. I'm sure, I mean, of course, it's a complex issue. But how come this doesn't penetrate the brain science into those circles? And even like sometimes you hear even parents say, and parents are not also well educated in brain science, right? In your center. And I would love to ask you about some of the experiments you conducted there. It's pretty fascinating reading all the discoveries and about all of the families. I think even, we don't know much about it. Even you're right that you were a surgeon, like you didn't know all of this information, right? From the beginning.
Yeah, well, so I'll answer the first question. Why don't we do more of it? It's a complex question. I think that it's this myth of American individualism that parents have to be tough and independent and go it alone. And it sort of perpetuates that providing societal supports, with paid leave or high quality childcare in some way infringes, on parenting, which we all know that if anything, if we want to give parents real choice, they need supports in doing that. So, and there's another sort of myth, right? We're, embedded deep in our DNA is this desire to love, nurture, and just get our children off to the best possible start. And let me tell you, I have worked with, so many families, and that is a universal, no matter their circumstances. I mean, they're always outliers, but by far and away. And yet we sort of confuse that truth with that parents are born with the knowledge of child development, right? I mean, that is a totally different scenario, especially since we're learning every day more and more about how children develop. But, and that's why I think that this is not just for certain families. All families deserve to understand how their children develop and understand how powerful they are in building their children's brains. And, in the book, I talk about leveraging the healthcare sector for supporting parents. We always say, we often look to the education system because that's where children are, that's where school systems are. But the truth is that in the early years, children shouldn't be, they're not going to school and learning their ABCs, right? They need to be nurtured in other ways, right? Through a nurturing parent or caregiver or child care provider. But the healthcare system reaches almost all families and can provide this knowledge. So I think that the healthcare system plays a very powerful role in creating a parent nation. So,
yeah, that's a wonderful point. I remember when I first had my baby, my first pediatrician visit in the office, the pediatrician gave me one piece of advice, and my daughter was born in 2008. So smartphones, I think it's the first iPhone just came out around that time. And obviously a lot has changed since then in terms of what's available. But he gave me one piece of advice that as a new parent, I still remember that advice. He said, never park your child in front of a TV. TV is not a babysitter. And he used those words. And actually, I listened to that. I never exposed my child to TV up until she was 7 years old. Not that, but right now it's hard to do because everybody has a cell phone and kids are exposed to it. But I remember he gave me that piece of advice. And I'm sure if he gave me more information about brain development as opposed to, breastfeeding or other information about physical health, I would have listened. I would have read anything that they provided.
I love that. And I love that you listen to that because I tell you, I mean, as you know, I'm a practicing physician and we work with families. And when I go into the clinic room and literally everybody from the 1-year-old baby to the parent, to if there's a grandparent, to the other sibling, everybody's on their technology. And you're like, this does not help build a child's brain. No. So that's a whole different discussion.
That's a whole different discussion. But since you said building the child's brain, the 30 million words, the gap. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think that's fascinating too. And the 3 T's, very briefly, from your previous book.
Yeah, no. So I want to remember, I came to this as a surgeon, right? As a cochlear implant surgeon, in trying to figure out how the origins of the differences in some of my patients' outcomes after implantation, with some excelling developmentally and others not. And in my sort of journey of trying to understand the brain science and how language and interaction fed into children's development, one of the first studies I read was by Hart and Risley. And they did a study long ago. And let me just caveat it. It is far from a perfect study, but it was one of the first studies that I was exposed to at the University of Chicago. And basically what they showed in this very small study was that some children will have been exposed to 30 million fewer words than other children. And this differences in language exposure predicted differences in educational trajectories, IQ, language, et cetera. And it was just, of course, since then, lots of studies have shown why it's far from a perfect study. But I like to think of it as a first sentence in really a robust literature that shows that nurturing talk and interaction, rich language, conversations, positive tone, all go towards building a child's brain. And, remember, in the first 3 years of life, some 85% of the physical brain is grown. 1 million new neural connections are built, and it's really language and interaction that is building it. I like to say that, as I said, milk feeds the body, language and interaction fills the brain. So that's a little bit of that background. For me at the center, and I have many amazing colleagues, I was like, how do we take this science and put it into action? Can't just say, oh, go talk to your kid. And what we did was we boiled down the science to what we call the 3 T's to build your child's brain. Tune in, talk more, take turns. Tuning into your child, following your child's lead, getting on your child's level. Talk more, it's just as it sounds, using rich language, talking about the past, the future, and the present. And then take turns. I think this is the most powerful T, really having a conversation from day one. And parents can use these 3 T's, whether they're doing the laundry or taking the bus or out on the playground or even reading. And so these 3 T's are part of all of our programs for helping parents understand the brain science.
It's so interesting. When my daughter was little, my husband was working and he's a trial attorney and he was, doing a lot of legal research and reading a lot of legal stuff. And when he would hold my daughter and work at the same time, he was reading all this legal stuff to her. And I was just saying, yeah, it doesn't matter like what we talk to her about, or as long as she's hearing language or we're interacting with her. And it was very fascinating that when she was in 5th grade, obviously they test kids right here, like extensively in the United States. The language arts teacher told us, your daughter her vocabulary is at the level of 8th grader in grade in 5th grade. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe there is a connection to what we did.
Absolutely. 100%. And that's the thing is that what I love about this science, everybody, you can look at it from many different angles. For me, it's really about this incredible power that we have just by loving our kids, by exposing them to rich language. And it is so incredibly, I think, inspiring that parents are and caregivers are brain architects. But at the same time, it really shows you why society has to do better in supporting parents. When it doesn't happen, it's not because parents don't love their kids. It's because we've put barrier after barrier after barrier in front of parents. Everybody wants to get their kid off to the best possible start. We just make it super hard on parents.
I know. Oh my gosh. It's so hard. Sometimes I hear heartbreaking stories how parents work 2 jobs, right? And they come home, they do dinner time, bedtime, and they don't have time with their kids. You can't blame that parent. They have all the best intentions, but they don't have time. They have to work. If they don't work, who's going to support them?
Exactly.
Even with 2 working parents, it's very hard. I mean, I can't even imagine how difficult it is for single parents. And this is why, having the schools or childcare providers, the whole system, it has to work in supporting parents. If we care about about the future generation. Like you said, I mean, the kids of today are the adults of tomorrow. I mean, why aren't we investing in them, in their brain development?
I know. I know.
Right?
I
And
know.
it's crazy. And even in math or science, Americans are performing poorly compared to other countries. No wonder why, because it's like we don't value the early education, early childhood years. But
I know. It's so, I mean, I'm so with you. And it's just, I almost sometimes think like if we could see inside a baby's head in those first 3 years of life, you know how when you're on like, those glass bottom boats and you can see into the water and you're like, wow, there's a whole world of incredible fish, a whole life in here. I know this is, and if we could see all these neural connections happening in a baby's brain, like it's just so incredible. It's so overwhelming. And I'm like, why don't we invest? I think it's because we don't appreciate it. We have to imagine it. All these little kids look the same and they look happy and healthy for the most part. Like, it's just sad. So, but hopefully it'll change, right?
Hopefully you're more positive and optimistic about this than I am for some reason. and I love all the examples that you have, which we will address in the book. But there was something else in the book that caught my attention, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly. The ABCDarian, the program.
AbCDarian, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because that's pretty interesting too.
Yeah. Well, there's some sort of seminal research studies that form a lot of, have really contributed to our understanding of the power of investing in the early years. And so actually one of my colleagues here at the University of Chicago, Jim Heckman, has really shown how investing in the early years has this huge ROI. Like every dollar you invest, you get $13 back societally from improved education, improved health. And one of the studies that he's used is AbCDarian, which was unfortunately, I can't pull out all the specifics, but long and short of it was, an intensive early childhood wraparound program that supported, children often born into poverty and their parents, and really showing not only the improved educational trajectories from starting early, from giving children, rich interaction early on by supporting their parents, how it can improve not only their educational trajectories,
even crime, they decreased crime rates.
Crime, and even their mothers did better financially. And how, we often think so short-sightedly, like, oh my gosh, this program costs so much money, without really realizing that so many of these early childhood programs are a negative cost, because you spend a little bit now or you spend a whole lot more later. And for some reason, we like to spend more later than preventing issues. It's this whole prevention versus remediation. It's much cheaper to, build healthy brain development from the day one than trying to sort of play catch up.
I know. And as we know from research, right, how important the first year is, how critical. The first 3 years are very critical, but the first year is, in terms of if a child is exposed to adversity in the first year of life, and let's say the rest of that child's life has good experiences, the brain was already primed in the beginning, traumatized. And you can have another kid whose first year was great, had a good start, but then faced adversities later in life. Who does well in life? Who is more resilient, right? Of course, the person whose first year was nurtured and cared for and was given this good head start. The first year is absolutely critical. It's just amazes me that we don't invest in this. It's just, yeah. What I also found interesting, I mean, there's so many things and I'm jumping from one topic to another. Forgive me for that. But what I also found interesting is I want to ask you about 1968, April 6th or 7th. You know, tell us how significant that day is, April 7th.
Well, now everyone will know my age. No,
Yes,
I put it in the book.
You put it in the book, Dr. Suskind.
I put it in the book. Yeah, I tell the story of. I tell two sort of parallel stories back in that day. I actually start off with the story, believe it or not, of my birth, which sounds sort of funny because my mom was a social worker, working as part of the Lyndon Johnson War on Poverty in Baltimore. And, she always tells the story that, I was born literally just a few days after MLK's assassination, and how Baltimore was really literally going up in smoke. And she tells the story of, seeing the heartbreak of so many of these individuals not being able to leave while she was able to leave. And then, after, giving birth to me, believe it or not, she came back to work within 2 weeks of giving birth with me in tow. It's so strange that 50 plus years later, and we still don't have paid leave, but we had no paid leave back then or high quality childcare. So my mom brought me to work and put me in like a little closet where she had somebody stand in front of, and she would nurse me every time I cried. So I tell that story to say, wow, how much things haven't changed. But then I tell the story of a parallel story of Freddie Joyner, a little boy who was so instrumental in actually the Child Development Act. His tragic story is that he would run home every day from school. He was, I think, a first grader, to give his two siblings who were at home alone because his mom had to work multiple jobs and had no childcare and they were very poor. He would feed them every day during lunchtime with his free lunch. And one day on his way home, he was actually run over by a truck. And it made the news. It wasn't, I went and I actually tried to find out his mother's name. I couldn't find it. It's like her name was lost to history, but it was such an impactful, tragic story that this little boy had to feed his younger siblings who were babies at home alone, that Walter Mondale, really started pushing forward the Child Development Act. But I tell it as parallel stories because you can hear my story, my mother's story, and say, oh my gosh, how is it that we don't, support women and children? And then you hear Freddie Joyner's story and you realize not only do we not support women and children, but those families in poverty have it so much harder, right? It's part of a larger issue of abdicating our role to supporting children and families. But when you're poor or a family of color and in a country that, has, layer on layer of injustices, you realize just how much harder it is. So that's a long way to say that Freddie Joyner really helped sort of push forward this Child Development Act, which didn't end up happening. So
yeah, that was my favorite chapter in those two stories that you juxtapose. Yes, it was my favorite chapter. And then what a moving story. There was a quote I was trying to remember, and I Googled it, of course, and this is what it came up. The greatness of a nation can be judged by how it treats its weakest members. They say that this quote is attributed to Gandhi, but then I read that it's not. And there is another one. It was once said that the moral test of government is how that government treats those who are in the dawn of life, the children, those who are in the twilight of light, the elderly, and those who are in the shadows of life, the sick, the needy, and the handicapped. I think that just summarizes, it tells us what our country values or prioritizes. There was a mention of the elderly, and I would love to ask you about that, the AARP, and how elderly were the disadvantaged ones and how the AARP changed that. Can you tell that story? I think it's so inspiring.
Absolutely. And before I tell the story, I'm going to just sort of speak to what you just said about, how we value our children and our families. And the And the truth is that one of the reasons that things haven't moved, right? Our children don't vote, right? There's nobody really advocating for them. But when you really think about this issue, that the well-being of children depends on the support for their parents, you start realizing, well, there's a large demographic of people, right, who want the same things. They want just to get their children off to the best possible start. And as I started thinking about why are we in this moment in time, as you note, we've got so much science behind this. We don't need to do one more study to say what children and families need. We've got an economic case that is so solid, right? I mean, this huge return on investment for investing in the early years. The fact that businesses today are suffering because so many women are leaving the workforce because of the lack of childcare. What we don't have is political and public will. And so really thinking about, the elderly as a really powerful use case for going forward, I think is inspiring to me, right? Because there's one thing to say, oh gosh, this is the problem. It's always been a problem. Look, we all know it. I mean, there's so many stories in the news, but how do we go forward? And I think about how do we leverage this universality of everybody just wanting their kids to be okay and finding both our collective identity, the fact that there's more that unites us than separates us, the fact that we need to elevate our expectations, going back to what you said initially, Anna, about feeling, bad about yourself or just stressed, how understanding that issue is not an individual choice issue, but the fact that we live in a country that doesn't support you is something that I think can bring us together, right?
Right.
From all parts of life. I mean, so, this is a bipartisan issue. Most people become parents, and those who don't love a child and, care about the future. And the ARP shows when, as mentioned, the elderly back when, you talked about this Child Development Act, at that same time, the elderly were pushing forward changes for through the ARP to better the elderly state, because they were the poorest, most under-supported segment of society. Greater than 50% live below the minimum standards of decency. And through the ARP, Social Security and Medicare, no group is better cared for, right? Poverty rates drop by 70%. They continue to make gains, and they find unification beyond some individual identifiers to the fact that they want to lift all boats. And I think that parents and caregivers can be that for each other.
Yeah. When you told the story of Freddie, I noticed that you became very emotional. And your story, I just wanted to say that I noticed that obviously touches your heart too.
Yeah.
I
think, it's funny, not funny, but I was like, I tried to find, I've got research assistants at the University of Chicago. I tried desperately to find any family member. We reached out to like every joiner in the Baltimore, DC area, trying to find out his mother's name and, just a little bit more. But we, couldn't find anything. But he definitely comes, he was in several newspapers. The school that he used to go to actually is no longer a school, but it's so sad, right? I mean,
it is.
Here, he'd be a little bit older than me. So, but because so sad. So
it is. Yeah, it is sad. And it's very interesting that you are writing and advocating for these issues, given your birth story, it's like, I'm not surprised. It's like from the beginning, this is like your mission. You ought to do this. Your mom took you to work,
It's my mom's fault.
Oh, yeah. But it's a paid family and medical leave. This is insane too in this country that we don't have it. Only 10 states, I looked it up, only 10 states have it. in the United States. That's really sad. And even then, I mean, when women give birth, in some foreign countries, and we have so many foreign listeners, actually, I would love to hear feedback from them after this episode to learn more about their system and what's happening in their countries. But you give birth and you have to go back to work right away, right?
Yeah.
It's like, it's not even healthy for the woman. Like, what is this about? It's not about money. It's not about let's be tough and let's make it work. We don't care about parents, about mothers, about children. It's just surprises me. In fact, when all my life I worked with kids. I was a child psychologist for many years. Only after I became a mom myself 14 years ago, I realized if I want to help children, I need to help parents. And that's when everything shifted for me. And I started educating parents and giving them resources and support and helping them and teaching all the wonderful things about brain and science so that they can be empowered to empower their children.
Yeah, no, I mean, same with me, but
yeah.
Going back to, yes, we don't seem to care at all. And you know what? We should stop. That may not, it's not that it's not the answer. I wish that we did care, but you know what? There's so many people who do care, right? We've got 40 plus million parents who love their children, who, as I said, there's more in common than separates us. If we could find a way to bring together their voices, to advocate, like, fine, yes, I wish people would do it out of the goodness of their heart, but sometimes, in the same way with the elderly. I mean, you don't think a million times over Medicare and Social Security would have been rolled back unless there was a whole 38 million of them? Of course it would, even if people care about the elderly. So, you know what? It's just the way of this world, and we need to be more pragmatic. We need to say, okay, people aren't going to do it because the right thing. Maybe they'll do it because they know that 40 million of us care about our children and just want to give them the best possible start. So that's the surgeon in me talking.
What if you had like a magic wand? Like, what would you do? Like, what would be your wish? I know I want to ask you about your hope about the book and about this movement and about parentnation.org. I want to ask about that. But if you had a magic wand, what would you do? Like tap, 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 and things are changing.
Oh, Lord. So are you asking me what would be? So I have two answers, right? I'll tell you how this country and this world would be set up a little bit differently, and how I think you get there. I mean, I think, as I said in the book, I don't think that there's it's not just one segment of society that should and can play a role. We always think about this as purely policy lever. I mean, certainly policy levers are important. I mean, the fact that we don't have paid family and medical leave, that's nuts, right? I mean, there's a policy lever, but there's a business lever too, right? I mean, family-friendly policies and corporate America that understands that ideal workers are also parents and supporting them is critical. The healthcare sector plays a huge role in educating and supporting families and caregivers and parents themselves, finding their commonalities, looking at other parents as opposed to, worthy and unworthy. So we all play a role in building a parent nation and supporting families. So if I had a magic wand, it would be creating what a parent nation is, which is, for me, a society that values the labor and love of those parents and caregivers, building, the next generation. I mean, there's so much that we could talk about, and like, I'd love to see an AARP that really reflects the large, for the early year, especially the early years, supporting when all parents could use more support. And when that support would have an outsized influence on children's brain development. I'd love to see that. And that, as you know, if I really had a magic wand, that parents that we would start seeing all children as our children. Yeah, look, we will always love our own children and go to the ends of the earth for our own children. That's not going to change. That's just deep in our DNA. But if there would be a way that we could also look at other children and their parents as with love and support, it would be a really different world. You wouldn't need all the other levers, because then you do what's right in the end of the day.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about parentnation.org, and if the listener is inspired, how can one get involved and what can we do?
Absolutely. So, I always joke, because I'm a surgeon, I'm never satisfied that, I want to make sure that the ideas in the book give them the best chance for manifesting. And so I have an amazing team that I work with that helped create sort of a 4-part curriculum and resources, free and accessible downloadable resources for bringing together community and really looking to make positive change in your own community and your own country. So go to parentnation.org. They're free and downloadable. There's a book discussion guide. There are tools and resources, and just would love people to, embrace any small or larger lift that you can do in your community.
Yeah. Is there anything else you would like to say before we say goodbye? Anything that I didn't ask, or anything that is in your heart based on our conversation, or a comment, a lingering thought that you want to share?
No, I mean, I think, well, first of all, this has been a wonderful, lovely conversation. I wish if we could clone you, it would be a very different world. So maybe that's what my request is, that we just clone you, because it's really about, love and empathy for all children and giving them a chance. I mean, I think so many of the issues that we see in this world could be ameliorated if we just started early and gave families the support that they need.
I know. So true. It's so true. Well, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being present and sharing. Your passion is contagious from the book and from this conversation. And I also pay attention to the details, of course. Parent Nation on the cover, the title is in yellow. So it means it's an optimistic message. After all, it's not a dark book. And you give so many ideas of how this is possible, how change is possible. It's not just, you harp on the problem, but I love how rich this book is. And we didn't even talk about everything in the book. So I'm really honored that you were able to come and I got to speak with you. And you don't look your age, even though now we know your actual age.
I have to tell you, as I said in the beginning, you make my heart sing. I mean, really, as you know, as a creator, these are labors of love, and you just want it to be part of a larger positive change. And so your response you made my day.
Oh,
so thank you.
Oh, thank you. I hope this book will spark a movement. Truly, I would love to live in that world, in the Parent Nation world.
Fingers crossed.
Yes.
We'll keep pushing for it together.
Yes, thank you. That concludes today's conversation, my dear listener, and I hope you enjoyed it. What an important topic. I am really looking forward to discussing it in our private Facebook group. I can't wait to hear what you think about this subject. And if you are a foreign listener, please get in touch and tell me how things are in your country. For foreign listeners, we have a free tool on the contact page of my website. Go to authenticparenting.com/contact and access the tool. I always love hearing from you. If you have a comment, question, feedback, or simply you want to say hello, get in touch. Send me a note to the email info@authenticparenting.com. But of course, I prefer audio message, so call the number 732-763-2576 and leave a voicemail. If you enjoy the podcast, you can show your support in several ways. Number one, you can share it on social media. You can write a review on Apple Podcasts. And of course, consider becoming a patron on patreon.com. With a small monthly contribution, you can say thank you and show your love for the podcast. You can learn more and choose a level of support at patreon.com/authentic parenting. You can find the show and follow it wherever podcasts are played. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, and elsewhere. Until next week, connect to the present moment, to yourself and your children. I am Anna Seewold. Thank you so much for listening.